Hello and welcome to all our stakeholders to this second Operations Update webcast for 2021. I'm Malcolm Ball, Head of Investor Relations, and I'm joined by Lachlan Hay, Director of Global Operations.
Hi Malcolm, good to be with you.
Good to see you too, Lachlan. I want to start, if I can, by sharing some of the reactions of stakeholders and the market in general to our recent financial results.
Sure thing, Malcolm, go ahead.
The reaction was positive, and just stepping through some of that, the independent analysts who cover CLINUVEL issued positive updates. We participated in several investor conferences hosted by analysts and investment banks, reaching more than 30 different institutions, some of whom are new to CUV and are progressing discussions with us. Many one-on-one meetings were held and emails were received congratulating the CLINUVEL team on the results. That was particularly pleasing. Media coverage was extensive and encompassed a wide range of print and online reports with streamed interviews. For example, the interviews conducted with the CEO by Ms. Annette Bleacher at Ausbiz, Mr. Helmut Joen and his following of German-speaking retail shareholders with Mr. Max Rode in German on YouTube, and Ms. Maria Petrakis for the Eureka Report, I think were the most noteworthy.
Yeah, Malcolm, when we post the webcast, can we include links to some of those pieces on the page so folks can find them?
Yes, for sure. Good idea. And lastly, I want to mention that CLINUVEL's investor webinar also attracted over 100 participants, and a briefing with Team Invest had over 90 members in attendance.
Malcolm, we've seen that the market's responded fairly positively as well. Do you want to run through that quickly?
Absolutely. If we look at the 7 days before and after the release of the results, the average daily trading volume increased by more than 4 times, and the closing share price increased by over 40% from the 25th of August to the 3rd of September. So this shows that the strategy we have followed and implemented is starting to attract attention.
Okay, shall we turn to operations?
Yes, so let's start with commercial operations in the US. These were a key driver of the record revenues achieved in the financial year to June 2021. So Lachlan, can you provide an update on US distribution?
Yeah, absolutely. So we previously reported that we've trained and accredited over 40 specialty centres to administer Cenes in the USA. This has been a considerable effort by the team in the US and requires their ongoing focus to maintain relationships with the specialty centres and assist treatment of patients as well as the reimbursement of the cost of treatment. Centre accreditation is a key commitment the company's made to the regulators globally to ensure that the product Cenes is used correctly and safely, and that EPP patients can receive consistent multidisciplinary care. Now, in the USA, training and accreditation is one of our obligations to the regulator, the US Food and Drug Administration, or FDA. Now, Cenes has to be administered by an accredited medical centre, and each dose of the drug that's administered is accounted for to confirm the controlled distribution of product. Now, this mitigates the regulator's concerns of the potential misuse of the drug, but also allows us to monitor this product's safe use. Now, we exercise diligence and responsibility to control the distribution of the drug through the specialty centres and work with them closely to ensure the trust conferred to us by the FDA is honoured. This is essential for the smooth operation of the business in the US, and at the same time, I think that we really distinguish ourselves from other companies, and it's being noticed in a positive sense. Another important issue for the efficiency of the US operations is the new codes for the treatment of Cenes for EPP. I have to say, for many people, even lots of folks working in it, the US healthcare system is something of a deliberately constructed maze. Much of the population is covered by private healthcare insurance, and compared to the European or Australian systems in existence, healthcare providers need to be more hands-on in the administrative work to facilitate treatment payment. Now, by having specific designations that fit within the systems, the administrative burden is reduced. And this allows healthcare providers to focus on what they do best, focus on patient care. Now, perhaps I can expand a little bit more on what we've announced before. And these are the 2 new codes which are now in existence, and then these are relevant specifically to Cenes. Firstly, we have the J code for the Cenes implant, and secondly, the CPT code for the administration of Cenes by accredited medical personnel. The J code's been effective since the 1st of January 2021, and the CPT code is under review by the CPT editorial panel. Now, the updated CPT procedural codes will become effective on the 1st of January 2022, and we trust there'll be a new code for the administration of Cenes. Now, here I really have to pay testament to the work of the North American team, led by Dr. Linda Ting, for getting so much of the logistics and the distribution in place, including the treatment codes, in order to be able to facilitate treatment for patients. Now, what I would say is that the codes are used by specialty centres and by insurers to claim and reimburse the cost of treatment. These codes are unique to the treatment of EPP, and they facilitate smooth insurance claim processing and processing of reimbursement by insurers. And for the understanding of those who read financials closely, the code should also help reduce the cash receipt periods in the US. That is the time period between the recognition of the sale of a Cenes implant and the actual receipt of the cash payment after the implant is injected.
Thanks, Lachlan. Well, you know, I look at financials quite carefully. And that's a great segue to ask you to provide more clarity on the cash receipt cycle in the US compared to Europe. We have addressed this previously, but I think it's still worth reiterating for everyone's understanding.
Sure, Malcolm, I appreciate it. It's not something that's overly well understood. So let's start by noting that CLINUVEL's first 4 years of commercial operations were focused on the distribution of Cenes in Europe. Now, the time from booking of a sale in the accounts to cash reimbursement in Europe was relatively short. It was around 30 days. And so followers of the company could see a reasonable concordance between the periodic reporting of sales and cash receipts. The issue of a difference between sales revenue and cash receipts has really emerged as our business has developed in the US. Now, remember, we commenced distribution of Cenes in the US in April 2020, and thus financial year 2021 was the first full year of commercial operations. In the US, the cash receipt period is longer than Europe. And as there are more parties involved, I mentioned before the reimbursement and the maze of American healthcare, thus the claim and the reimbursement process is different. So really this explains why the cash receipts in the financial year to June 2021 were 38,723,000, and the sales revenues from the commercial operations were higher at 47,976,000. Now, as a result, trade receivables on the balance sheet increased from 6.613 million in financial year 2020 to 16.089 million in financial year 2021. So receivables in the US receivables are, as they say in accounting circles, more aged than in Europe, but they're good quality and they're due from national and state insurers who have agreed to reimburse the cost of treatment under the prior authorization process. Now, we do expect the receipt cycle to shorten in the US as all parties to the process gain experience, and we expect the new treatment codes will assist this even further. That's the impact of the unique treatment codes. They result in a smoother and quicker processing of claims and hence reimbursement and cash flow back into our business.
Well, that's a very clear explanation, Lachlan, and certainly I'll be following the trend in cash receipts and revenues over time. I'd now like to delve into a few operational matters as they relate to our clinical studies. Our expanded clinical program to translate our technology to other indications has led to increased discussion on our studies. I thought you could provide an overview of our approach to the design and conduct of these studies. Yeah,
Malcolm, not a problem. There are several points to make to outline how CLINUVEL conducts its research and builds a program. And in particular, I think this is at times different to industry norms. Firstly, we take a targeted approach. We identify and pursue indications only when there is support from patients, from expert physicians, from regulatory and ethics bodies. Now, in innovative research, this is necessary. You need to prepare that environment for acceptance, which takes time. Next, we only work with expert centres. There are several reasons for this, but perhaps I can highlight a few. Firstly, if the experts don't accept your program, you don't have one. Secondly, these centres have the ability to be active partners in the development program, helping to develop thought process rather than just conducting a study as if they were a clinical research unit. And thirdly, you're able to add to the body of research by giving these experts the freedom to publish without company involvement. Now, this means that your peer-reviewed published data, I should say, might lag a company announcement. They're not driven by a pharma company, but by the experts themselves. But this provides independence and comfort to your publications. We've done this throughout our program. And finally, I would say that it's common and becoming more common for pharma companies to outsource much of their R&D work and just manage projects. We take a different approach, particularly when it comes to clinical work. Our model is to train and develop our own team to oversee all of our clinical work in-house while maintaining long-term relationships with those key suppliers who do tasks where we need their assistance.
Okay, now we talk about this concept, the in-house concept, a lot, but it might be worthwhile if you can clarify what that really means in terms of the business and how it runs.
Okay, so to perhaps be a little more concrete and provide a little more colour and detail. Dr. Bilbao and her team are hands-on in engaging potential experts and centres for studies, in scoping and drafting protocols, making regulatory and ethics submissions, conducting studies, analysing data, compiling results, finalising reports. It's part of the reason that when we talk about R&D costs, we need to do so in the context of other financial reporting line items. Now, I'd say this approach is not unique, but it is becoming rarer in pharma, and it works for us, helps us manage the risks. To be frank, nobody cares about our program as much as we do, particularly with regard to the safety of patients who volunteer for studies. It's why we continue this model to this day. Now, there is a side benefit to this, of course, which is that our clinical team are multifaceted. They're able to address issues end-to-end within research, rather than just managing projects and suppliers.
Understood. Can you also touch on our approach to announcements of our clinical program?
Sure, and there's been one this week, so I think it's important to get a bit of a handle on how that works. Now, as you know, one of our core values is knowledge building and sharing. But this doesn't mean educating our competitors for free. As a result, we develop our programs behind closed doors, and we announce them once key milestones have been reached. This varies between programs and regions, but a program announcement is often issued once a protocol has been approved by both a regulatory and an ethics committee. And that's what we saw this week with the CUV156 study. Now, if you look at the xeroderma pigmentosum, so the XP program, which is part of the DNA repair program, and compare that, say, with the stroke program for AIS, you're going to see some subtle variances in how and when we announced each program.
Thanks, Lachlan. I think that detail is very good to know and very important for our ongoing clinical program. Continuing the focus on our clinical studies, can you comment on the impact of the COVID environment on the commencement and completion of clinical studies?
Yeah, absolutely, Malcolm. And I think we all recognise how disruptive COVID has been to the health and quality of life of billions of people worldwide. Now, medical resources have been diverted to attend to COVID patients, and thus it's affecting the ability of patients to receive normal treatment. I'd also say for CLINUVEL specifically, EPP patients have faced travel restrictions and difficulties in attending treatment centres. We've managed the situation well in the commercial operations of the business, but it's a different matter to commence a clinical trial or clinical study if the probability of COVID disruption is high. Disruption is what you want to avoid.
Yeah.
Now, dedicated physicians and hospital staff do not want to be diverted from a clinical study to attend to other patients in a crisis situation. The impact on the patients for a study due to a delay or a halt in progress can't be understated either. The concrete example is XP patients. These are severely ill individuals. A course of treatment being interrupted due to an unavailability of resource, medical resource, or an inability to attend the treating hospital is incredibly detrimental to their physical and mental well-being. I would say that CLINUVEL is focused on ensuring all the settings of the clinical study are as right as possible before we can commence. Patients and a commitment to put the patient's welfare first is the key. Clinical results and the drug development path will progress in due course on the timing that respects the welfare of all that are involved, and that's patients, but also the medical personnel.
Thanks, Lachlan. I agree. Putting patients first has been our approach and remains our approach, and indeed is the right approach. Now I'm going to change tack now because I know we've touched on this before, but the issue of our R&D expenses is still topical amongst shareholders. Can you talk to the likely trend in our R&D expenses and how they relate to total expenses?
Absolutely, Malcolm, and I think it comes as no surprise that R&D expenses are going to rise as we progress and expand our clinical program.
Right.
As was mentioned before, we operate an integrated business model in which key functions are undertaken in-house. And this gives us more control over the costs and also the quality of outcomes. Now, I think this is reflected in our prudent management and control of expenses over time and the outcomes that we've achieved year on year. But in part, reflecting this in-house approach, our personnel expenses, for example, account for over 50% of our total expenses. Now, in the same vein, our R&D expenses are embedded in a range of expense categories. It's not just the non-clinical and clinical research and development expense category that we report. For example, the costs associated with our Research, Development and Innovation Centre in Singapore are research and development in nature, but expensed over a range of categories: premises, utilities, materials, and of course, personnel. So for the reference of stakeholders, we can advise that our annual R&D expenses are typically more than 40% of our total expenses, depending on the year and the scale and timing of our activities. But the short answer is yes, R&D expenses are expected to rise in financial year 22 and beyond. But as we said previously, whether R&D expenses increase as a percentage of total expenses depends really on growth in other expenses to support business.
All right. Thanks, Lachlan. I think that explanation discounts, shall we put it, the myth that we don't spend much on R&D. Now I want to move to the challenges of our expansion. As we know, CLINUVEL is on a growth and expansion path. And yes, a discussion on these challenges would be appropriate at this point.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Mel.
So I want to start by talking about the challenge of growing our personnel team. So over the past few years, I know that we've tripled the size of our team across all points of our global operations. We've recruited scientists, operational managers, pharmacists, accountants, and a range of professionals in the communications, branding, and marketing division. In a competitive environment, it's pleasing we have been able to attract talented personnel, and working with them is an absolute pleasure. The recruitment process takes time and effort though, and the necessary induction and training of new personnel requires even more commitment from the company to help those new team members find their feet. Overall though, the new team members have embraced the CLINUVEL culture, and we've grown our team complement well to support the expanding activities of the group. And this focus continues. So building on that, Lachlan, can you comment on the challenges of growth in our systems and processes?
Yeah, I think the first comment is that we're fortunate in one sense that the systems and processes that we've had for the distribution of Cenes in Europe were scalable to support the expansion of the commercial operations in the US. I mean, of course, they had to be adapted for the US, but this aspect of our expansion went pretty smoothly. We're also finding that we need to consider new systems to support growing the business. And this involves a process of scoping our requirements and assessing available options. Processes always need to be reviewed and refined, but we also find the input of our new personnel to this continuous improvement process is most welcome.
Yes, Lachlan, that contribution of new personnel is pleasing. Just changing tact on the challenge of ensuring ongoing supply of Cenes. How have we been managing the ongoing supply, particularly as the demand for treatment has increased?
Now, this is one of a number of critical issues in the business. We've been able to meet the rise in demand despite a more complicated supply chain due to the COVID pandemic. What I would say is that the pandemic has added both time and additional expense to the supply chain. Now, our supply chain is global. It requires temperature, but also other controls to be in place, from amino acid sourcing all the way through to finished packaging and release to market. Some of the time frames of these stages have been affected during the current environment and have drawn our attention even more than before. What's really pleasing though is that the team has risen to this challenge. I'd also say that we very much appreciate the flexibility of regulators and the expert centres to ensure that we can ensure continuity of patient treatment.
Thank you, Lachlan. The CLINUVEL story is very much about rising to challenges, and we know there will be more, and we will deal with them as we have in the past. We have covered a wide range of issues in this webcast, and I hope it has provided new insights to all of our stakeholders. In conclusion, I'd like to provide an overview of the planned events and moves to the end of the year. In a day or so, we will release the 2021 annual report and notice of meeting. Then later in October, we'll issue the quarterly cash receipts for the September quarter 2021 and hold the annual general meeting in virtual format on the 10th of November. We will also issue more news communiques, chair and MD letters, provide a third strategic update for the year, and issue updates on the clinical program through to the end of 2021. So after covering a lot of ground today, I only need to say, Lachlan, thank you for joining me and thank you for your insights.
Thanks, Malcolm. It's always a pleasure to have a chat, and thanks to everybody who joined us online.
And from me, thank you everyone and goodbye.